This is the recovered journal of Jack the Anvil. It was found years after his disappearance in the city of Ptolus. The final entry ends as he and his companions depart to stop Killraven's ascension and rescue the last Runeborn child. They did not return. This is where their story begins. Welcome to Together Again, a Ptolus campaign podcast. Episode 0, the beginning of a Ptolus Chronicle. "15 years. That's long enough for careers to form, for houses to be bought, for kids to be born, and for hairlines to retreat, for some of us more than others. It's also long enough for something you love to quietly become a memory. See, back in high school, and through most of our 20s, we played role-playing games constantly. Dungeons and Dragons, Cyberpunk 2020, Shadowrun, Deadlands, the original. Friday nights, weekend marathons, campaigns that ran for years. Characters we still reference. Decisions we still debate. So we had a ranger once who was magically compelled to eliminate each of the party members, and almost succeeded. We had a rogue who thought it would be amusing to pick the pocket of the other rogue in the group, kicking off a not-so-friendly rogue rivalry. We had late-night arguments about rules that lasted longer than the encounters themselves. Those stories stuck. But sadly, the table didn't. No one stormed out. There wasn't a dramatic final session. It was slower than that. I joined the military and moved away. Several of us got married, started families, careers. Scheduling shifted from see you Friday to spreadsheets and calendars. We stayed friends. We shared memes. We texted about life. But the shared storytelling, the thing that only happens when everyone leans into the same imagined space, went quiet. You assume you'll get back to it. Then 5 years pass, then 10, then 15. Now, when virtual tabletops finally became reliable, when they stopped feeling like tech demos and started feeling like actual tables, that geography problem disappeared. Distance wasn't the excuse anymore. So I asked the question, what if we tried again? Not a massive commitment, not a forever campaign, just see if the old magic was still there. Can the boys roll the dice like they used to? Now there's risk in revisiting something you loved. What if it doesn't feel the same? What if we've changed too much? What if the magic was just youth and free time? The first night we logged in, it was awkward. Cameras flickering on. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hold on, I need to update this. We laughed at how long it had been, and then someone rolled a die. And everyone leaned in. Not because the role mattered, but because it felt familiar. Not the same, but familiar. And that's where the name came from. Together again. At first, that was about us. But as the campaign unfolded, it became about something more. Now, why this city? Why Ptolus? Well, when I first started looking for something to run, I wasn't just looking for a rule system, I was looking for a place. If we were going to reunite after 15 years, the setting had to carry weight. It had to feel intentional. And then I stumbled across a massive book, over 600 pages, called Ptolus. I bought it out of curiosity. And then for the next 2 weeks, I disappeared into it. But what struck me wasn't just the size, it was the density of it. Every district had history. Crime families had internal politics. Noble houses tied to arcane research. Entire religions tangled in tension and influence. And beneath the streets, dungeon layers, forgotten chambers, buried ruins, secrets older than the city itself. And then there was chaosy tech. And we're not talking steampunk gadgets or clever magical devices. We're talking something invasive, something corrupting, power that just felt wrong. It didn't read like a setting waiting for heroes. It read like a city already in motion. Most fantasy settings feel like a stage. You drop players in, and the world waits politely. Ptolus didn't feel polite. If the players never showed up, those crime bosses would still consolidate power. The cults would still operate. And the delvers would still descend beneath the streets and die forgotten. The players weren't the center of the universe. They were the new arrivals. And I loved that. I had also never run an urban campaign before. We had done wilderness treks. We had done war arcs, long overland travel stories. But urban play is different. In a wilderness campaign, you burn a bridge and you ride away from it. In a city, you walk past that bridge the next day. If you insult a merchant, you see that merchant next week. If you disrupt a gang, the gang has allies. If you protect someone vulnerable, word spreads. The city remembers. The first time they disrupted a gang operation, ripples started moving. The first time they interfered with a warehouse deal, people noticed. The first time they protected a Runeborn child, the world reacted. Not because I forced it to, but because the city already had the pieces in place. See, Ptolus isn't a blank canvas, it's a machine. You drop players into it, and the gears start turning around them. And that's what hooked me. I think another interesting aspect to the campaign was that it didn't start as an epic. It started more simplified. The characters weren't heroes. They didn't have ambitions to delve beneath the city and take on incredible creatures and gather riches. They were refugees, arriving in a city that didn't care about them at all. They took jobs at the docks. They shared rooms in a flop house. They mapped out taverns across the city for the cheapest drinks. They picked fights they probably shouldn't have. But then they made their first real move. By chance, they came upon and disrupted a gang operation. See, in a wilderness game, that would have been a one-off encounter. In a city, that gang had territory, allies, rivals. Suddenly, they weren't anonymous anymore. Then came the Grayson house, and what was supposed to be a simple haunted house job became tunnels, creatures, forgotten chambers beneath the city. And that's when they realized for the first time the city had depth. And then the Runeborn arc happened. Now, there's a moment every GM remembers. The moment when the table goes quiet. For us, it was the first time they saw what was being done to those children. Experimentation, exploitation. A cult convinced mutilation was sanctity. I didn't plan for that to become the heart of the campaign. But once it hit the table, the players locked in. They could have walked away. They didn't. Instead, they adopted a child. They hid her. They changed her identity. And that's when the campaign stopped being about survival and it became about protection. They went on to build a legitimate business, not as a front, but as a foundation for the future. They made alliances, some uneasy. The Knights of the Golden Cross became allies of circumstance. The Knights of the Pale became necessary but uncomfortable partners. Crime factions took notice, and one name kept resurfacing: Killraven. Not immediately as a final villain, but as a shadow growing longer. The more they protected the Runeborn children, the more that shadow tightened around them. That's when I realized this wasn't just a reunion campaign. It was becoming legacy. Now, the campaign didn't end with a victory parade. The characters didn't return home to riches and adornment. It ended in an epic final encounter that ended in a bang. Then mystery. They knew Killraven was attempting something larger than territorial control, something ritualistic, something transformative. They knew there was one final Runeborn still in danger, a Runeborn that had slipped through their fingers earlier in the campaign. They also knew the forces involved were powerful, far beyond street-level threats. I remember telling them plainly, "You know this may not end well." No one backed down. They chose to go. Not because they were certain they would win, but because they couldn't live with themselves if they didn't try. The final session ended not with resolution, but with the unknown. The journal that this podcast follows ends as they leave. There is no recorded outcome. The business they built continued. The Runeborn grew up. The city kept turning. But they did not return. And that absence is where the next story begins. From this point forward, I will step aside, and what follows is the journal of Jack the Anvil. It begins outside of the city with a group that is hopeful, broken, and together again.